Tallulah Willis had always found comfort in the quiet corners of her mother's Idaho ranch. On a cloudy spring afternoon, she was rifling through an old cedar trunk in the attic, searching for vintage pieces to repurpose. The attic smelled of pine dust and time. Under faded denim jackets and a pile of old movie scripts, her fingers brushed against something unexpected. A small wooden box, its surface scratched, its brass latch cold and stiff. Inside, nestled carefully, were dozens of letters, yellowed, handwritten, tied together with a single red ribbon. Her breath caught. There in her father's bold, unmistakable handwriting was her mother's name. Some envelopes bore lipstick smudges, others had tear stains. One was dated just 2 months before their public divorce. Her heart pounded. Before we dive into this emotional journey through family, fame, and forgotten love, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories that touch the heart. Tallulah wasn't sure what to do. She sat cross-legged on the attic floor, clutching the bundle of letters to her chest as if they might vanish. These weren't just love notes. They were relics of a relationship she'd only seen through tabloid headlines and distant family anecdotes. Growing up, her parents' divorce had always been a quiet wound. It was never violent, never dramatic, but the absence, the cool politeness between Bruce and Demi had shaped her in ways she never fully understood. She untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated 1992, the year she was born. Her father's handwriting was neat, his tone playful. "Do you remember that night in Santa Fe when we snuck out to see the stars, and you said you felt safest when the world was dark?" he wrote. "I didn't say it then, but that's when I knew you were my home." Tallulah's throat tightened. She read 3 letters, then stopped. They weren't all sweet. Some were filled with arguments, insecurities, confessions of jealousy. But even in the anger, there was care. In one, Demi apologized for being emotionally distant while filming G.I. Jane, admitting how the pressure of being Hollywood's tough girl had built walls around her. Another letter from Bruce was dated shortly before the divorce. "I still love you, even though I know we're unraveling. Maybe we were always meant to burn bright and fast, but God, I wish we could slow time." Tallulah blinked back tears. She had never heard either of her parents speak like this. To the world, they were polished, poised, the glamorous couple who had parted ways gracefully. But here in these pages was raw humanity, vulnerability, hope. She clutched the letters again and looked around the attic, suddenly aware of how much silence surrounded her. The creak of the floorboards under her made her feel suspended between past and present. These letters had been hidden away for decades, intentionally or accidentally, she didn't know. But now in her hands they breathed life back into a story she thought she knew. The weight of what she'd found settled deep in her chest. Her fingers trembled. Should she read them all? Should she tell her sisters? Was she even supposed to have found them? Outside the attic window, the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting warm light across the dusty floor. Tallulah didn't have answers, only questions and a storm of emotions she hadn't expected to face today. But she knew one thing. This was not just a box of forgotten letters. This was the beginning of something much bigger. And somewhere deep down, she felt a shift, a small, quiet opening where clarity might someday come through. Tallulah couldn't sleep that night. The letters were all she could think about. They lay beside her bed, neatly stacked, bound once more with the red ribbon. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw phrases echoing from ink long dried. "I still love you. Maybe we were always meant to burn bright and fast." Her hands trembled when she reached for the stack again. She hadn't planned to read more tonight, but the pull was too strong. Her chest tightened with every word, as if each letter reached into a part of her she didn't know needed healing. But a voice inside kept asking, was it right? Was she invading something sacred? These weren't meant for her, at least not then, yet they had found their way to her now, and the questions they stirred inside her demanded answers. She opened another. This one was longer and written in Demi's delicate script. It was raw, painfully honest. "I loved being your wife, Bruce, but I was afraid every day. Afraid I was failing you, failing the kids, failing myself. I stopped knowing who I was unless I was performing for someone." Tallulah wiped a tear from her cheek. These weren't just love letters. They were confessions, apologies, declarations, pleas. They were the unseen scaffolding of her family's past. Memories rushed back. Nights she cried alone in her room without knowing why. Mornings with awkward silence between her parents. Years of therapy trying to untangle feelings she couldn't name. Now, so much of it made sense. She stared at the ceiling, recalling a moment when she was 11. Her father had taken her to a diner, just the two of them. He'd seemed distracted, tapping his fingers on the table. He told her, "You remind me of someone I loved very much." She had thought he meant her mother. Now she wondered if he meant the person Demi had been. Not the actress, not the icon, but the vulnerable, scared woman in these letters. Should she tell Rumer and Scout? The idea weighed heavily on her. What would they think? Would they be angry? Hurt? Or would they understand, like she was beginning to, that love was never as simple as it looked from the outside? She opened another envelope. Bruce's words this time. "If we had met in Idaho instead of on a movie set, maybe we could have lasted forever. You and I weren't built for spotlights, Dee. We were built for rivers and quiet, for late-night pancakes and mismatched socks." A lump formed in her throat. This was a love that had lived quietly behind the noise of fame. A love that cracked and bent, but never fully broke. They had loved each other deeply, messily, humanly, and that love had shaped everything Tallulah was, whether she'd realized it or not. Her phone buzzed. A text from a friend asking to meet up. She stared at it, fingers hovering, then turned it over. She couldn't talk to anyone right now. Not until she understood what all this meant. Because reading these letters wasn't just about her parents. It was about her. Her own patterns, her relationships, the way she held back when she should be vulnerable, or clung too hard when she should let go. She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew she was standing at the edge of something real, something that might help her make peace with the past she inherited and the future she had the power to create. The next morning, Tallulah woke with a decision carved quietly into her heart. She packed a small bag, placed the bundle of letters inside, and booked a flight. There was someone who needed to see them, someone who had once written these words with trembling hands and hope pressed between lines. Her father. Bruce had been living in a secluded home outside Los Angeles, surrounded by nature, memory, and the quiet rhythms of a slower life. His health had made communication more difficult in recent months, but there were still moments, clear, luminous, where recognition flickered like sunlight through trees, and Tallulah needed one of those moments now. When she arrived, the nurse greeted her gently, guiding her to the sunroom where Bruce sat in his favorite chair. The air was filled with the scent of lemon tea and faint music from a nearby speaker. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. There was a softness in his gaze, something still familiar. She sat beside him and took his hand. "Hi, Dad." He smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting slowly. "I found something," she said, voice tight. "Letters. From you. To Mom." He blinked, and his fingers tightened around hers just slightly. She pulled out one letter, not the saddest, not the happiest, but one that felt like a bridge. She began to read aloud, carefully. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "I never told you this, but I used to watch you sleep when the world got too loud. You were my quiet." Bruce's eyes grew glassy. A tear rolled down his cheek. "She was my best friend," he whispered. Tallulah squeezed his hand. "She still is." They sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of it all rest between them. No explanations, no need. Later that evening, she called Rumer and Scout. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she didn't hold back. She told them everything: the attic, the box, the letters, the visit with Dad. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Rumer said softly, "Can we read them together?" Tallulah exhaled. "Yes. I think we should." That weekend, the three sisters sat around their mother's old kitchen table, the wood scratched from years of family life. They lit candles, sipped tea, and opened the past one page at a time. Each letter peeled away layers of distance they hadn't realized existed, not just between their parents, but between themselves. For the first time, They saw Bruce and Demi not as celebrities, not as mythic figures in glossy magazines, but as two flawed, tender, complicated people who had tried, really tried, to build something real. They cried. They laughed. Scout joked about one particularly cheesy line Bruce had written, "Your smile is my morning alarm, and I never want to hit snooze." But even in the laughter, there was reverence. A shift had begun. The foundation of their understanding, once built on fragments and assumptions, was being rebuilt, letter by letter. That night, Tallulah received a call. It was Demi. Her voice was calm but curious. "I heard you've been reading our history." "I have," Tallulah replied. "There's a lot I didn't know." Demi paused. "Do you have the letters now?" "Yes." "Can I see them?" Tallulah hesitated, then nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. "Yes. I think it's time." The next day she packed the letters once more, aware that something important was unfolding. Not an ending, not closure, but a return to something quietly true. Demi sat on the edge of the couch, the box of letters resting on her lap. Her fingers hovered over the red ribbon, hesitant, almost afraid. Across from her, Tallulah watched silently, heart pounding. The room felt suspended in time, thick with unspoken memory. Finally, Demi pulled the ribbon loose. The paper was familiar. So was the handwriting. Her breath hitched as she opened the first envelope. For a long time she said nothing, just read. Her eyes moved slowly, carefully, and when she looked up, there was a tenderness there Tallulah hadn't seen in years. "I thought these were gone," Demi whispered. "I thought I'd lost them all." Tallulah nodded, unsure of what to say. Demi reached for another, unfolding it with trembling hands. Her voice was low, reverent as she began to read aloud. "No red carpet ever felt as real as our mornings with cereal and sleepy kids," Bruce had written. "I'd trade every premiere for one more Sunday when you wore my t-shirt and didn't brush your hair." The words hung in the air like incense. Demi's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, tears slid quietly down her face. She wiped them away, then looked at her daughter with a softness that went beyond sadness. "He always made me laugh, even when we were falling apart." Tallulah reached out, placing her hand over her mother's. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving him," Demi said. "I left because I didn't know how to love myself." Tallulah felt her throat tighten. These were not rehearsed lines, not the kind of thing people said during interviews. These were truths, whispered between generations. The door creaked. Scout and Rumor stepped into the room, wordlessly joining them. They sat on the rug, leaning in, drawn to the gravity of the moment. Demi pulled out another letter, this one thinner than the rest, folded with unusual care. As she opened it, her eyes widened. "This one... I never saw this one." It was addressed to Bruce, but unsigned. She began to read aloud, voice quivering. "You will always be my family in ways no one else could ever understand. I hated you some days, I adored you others, but through all of it, I carried you like a second heartbeat." She paused, then looked again at the handwriting. "This is mine," she whispered. "But I never sent it." She read on. "Maybe we weren't meant to grow old together. But I still picture you as the man who danced with me barefoot in the hallway, who made bad jokes just to hear me groan, who held my hair when I was sick and never asked for thanks. You were my first home." Silence settled over them. The weight of what had been lost and what remained felt suddenly intertwined. Not every love story ends with forever. But some live on in deeper ways, through memory, through shared children, through quiet acts of understanding. Demi folded the letter, pressing it against her heart. "I think this one should go to him," she said. The girls nodded. The next morning, they framed the unsent letter and placed it gently in Bruce's study. The sunlight caught the glass, illuminating the words not as a goodbye, but as a silent echo of love transformed. As they stood there, a quiet peace settled over them. Not closure, but connection. Not what could have been, but what was and still somehow in their hearts remained. The house was quiet that afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft golden patterns across the hardwood floors. Bruce sat in his chair, the framed letter resting on the side table beside him. He seemed calm, at ease, as if some distant part of his spirit had finally returned home. The family gathered slowly, naturally, no ceremony, no plan, just a mutual pull toward one another. Rumer arrived first, bringing fresh cookies. Scout followed, carrying an old Polaroid camera. Tallulah came last, with a small stack of childhood photos and the box of letters, now tied once again with the red ribbon. They didn't speak much at first. There was no need. Instead, they sat together in the living room, flipping through pictures, passing the letters gently between them. Sometimes one would read a line aloud, and the others would smile. Sometimes they cried, but mostly they remembered. Demi arrived later. She slipped in quietly, sitting next to Bruce. Her eyes met his, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or forgiveness. They didn't dwell on the past, they didn't pretend things had been perfect. But there was an understanding now. One built not on idealized memories, but on something richer. The acknowledgement of what had been real, flawed, and deeply human. Tallulah sat cross-legged on the floor, holding one of the letters in her lap. She looked around the room, at her parents, at her sisters, at the home they had built in fragments, and felt something she hadn't known she was missing. Safety. For so long she had felt unmoored, trying to understand where she came from and what had broken. But now the pieces had shifted, not into their original place perhaps, but into something new, something stable. "I think," she said softly, "we were always a family. We just forgot for a while." Scout nodded. "Maybe love doesn't end. It just changes shape." Bruce smiled faintly, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "Shapes are good," he murmured. "Circles." They stayed that way for hours, talking, sharing, sometimes just sitting in silence. There was no rush, no performance, only presence. When the sun began to dip below the horizon, Tallulah stepped outside and looked at the sky. The colors reminded her of something Bruce had written years ago. Love like dusk doesn't announce its arrival. It just settles around you until you realize you're surrounded. She breathed deeply, letting it in. As they prepared to leave, Demi kissed Bruce's forehead gently. "You were my beginning," she said. "And in some ways still are." He closed his eyes, his fingers brushing the edge of the letter's frame. The daughters lingered at the door, hugging one another tightly. No one wanted to break the spell just yet. Tallulah looked back one last time. The house wasn't just a building anymore. It was a vessel of memory, of letters once forgotten, of a love that had been reborn not as romance but as connection. And maybe that was enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more deeply moving true stories. And click the video on your screen now to discover another unforgettable journey of love and resilience, one that proves healing is always possible, even in the quietest corners of the past.